Hi, I'm Vanessa, and my husband Billy is part of this story which I want to share with you. Before delving into the details, I want to share a rather unfortunate experience. My initial encounter with Billy's parents, Leroy and Cheyenne, turned out to be a disaster. Their disapproving words echo in my memory. They expressed their disbelief, asserting that Billy had chosen a loser in me. According to them, I lacked any positive attributes, merely holding a desk job in a small office. The prospect of me providing a good life seemed implausible to them. Billy, however, stood firm, professing, "I love Vanessa, and material wealth is inconsequential." His parents remained adamant, emphasizing their expectations regarding financial status. They made it clear that unless I met their criteria, I couldn't be their daughter-in-law, urging Billy to find someone else. Despite my astonishment, Billy declared his commitment to me and his intention to marry. The news of his planned proposal left me stunned. Though I had hoped for a future together, the timing took me by surprise. Yet beyond the personal revelation, what truly shocked me was Leroy and Cheyenne's troubling attitude toward our relationship. Billy had previously cautioned me about his parents, saying, "Vanessa, you have to understand, they aren't admirable people. Your expectations of them are overly optimistic." I was taken aback by the intensity of their disapproval. Challenging Billy's characterization of his parents, I defended them as hard-working individuals who must have faced difficulties in raising him. However, his warning now seemed prophetic, as I grappled with the alarming reality of their opposition to our union. "Vanessa," Billy continued, "you must comprehend the reality of my parents. While they did contribute to putting me through college, it wasn't purely out of a sense of support. It was driven by their greed. Their long-standing desire for me to marry into wealth was rooted in the expectation that my wife's financial resources would secure a comfortable life for them. As a naive individual, I was initially oblivious to the extent of their cruelty and selfishness," he concluded. In stark contrast, my parents were genuinely wonderful people, a fact even Billy acknowledged. Despite financially assisting his parents, Billy maintained a distant relationship with them, harboring a deep-seated disdain for reasons unknown. Despite this, he never completely severed ties, as his parents constantly guilted him about the sacrifices they claimed to have made. The day I met his parents was an eye-opener. Despite the protests of my future in-laws, Billy went ahead with proposing to me, and we got married. Despite their threats to boycott the wedding, they reluctantly attended. Billy had to plead with them to come, given his limited family connections. He convinced them, "Vanessa isn't a destitute orphan. Her father owns a house and some property." Their approval was only secured when Billy highlighted this. However, their motives remained transparent. At the wedding, they made it clear that they still disapproved of our marriage, expressing disappointment that Billy hadn't married into wealth. "We wouldn't have attended if we believed Vanessa had nothing," they said, insinuating that my father's possessions were the only saving grace for them to grace the occasion. Today, on my wedding day, I want to make it clear that my father is healthy, so there's no reason for inheritance to come up. This day is about my marriage, and I hope you'll remember the kindness you've shown by being here when any future conversations about a house inheritance arise," I replied angrily upon hearing my in-laws' hurtful remarks. Then I stepped away from them. My father was the sole living family member in my life, and the comments on my wedding day were profoundly disheartening. The audacity of Leroy and Cheyenne, demanding a share of my money, left me incredulous. Despite the turmoil, I chose not to burden Billy with the details, not wanting to spoil his special day. Additionally, I understood the difficulty he faced in cutting off his parents. Regrettably, our situation took a nosedive from that point onward. While Billy and I were consistently happy together, his parents incessantly intruded into our financial affairs. Leroy and Cheyenne persistently probed us about my father's net worth, and their behavior reeked of embarrassment and entitlement. Refusing to disclose the information did not deter them, and for several years, we tolerated their intrusive ways due to Billy's desire to maintain some relationship with them. Despite our attempts to resist, Billy's parents managed to drain our savings with their insatiable demands for money, accompanied by various excuses and guilt-tripping tactics. Their relentless comments about me and my inheritance became a constant nuisance. I chose to ignore them, but the situation hit rock bottom when my father was diagnosed with aggressive cancer and his time was limited. Living far away, we flew to visit him multiple times, a decision that never pleased Leroy and Cheyenne. They criticized us, saying, "Spending money on visits is wasteful, especially with your father in hospice care. It's pointless." Their callous remarks insinuated that the impending loss of my father justified saving money instead of being by his side. I vehemently disagreed, asserting, "Visiting my dying father is not a financial waste, and decisions about our money are entirely our prerogative. You have no authority to dictate that we should consider you our in-laws and heed your opinions. It is for your well-being, as we believe that investing in individuals with a longer life expectancy would be more prudent," they had the audacity to say. I was infuriated by their remarks, especially given my father's deteriorating health, which was causing me immense distress. Those who have experienced the loss of a parent would understand the emotional turmoil I was enduring during this challenging period. Contrary to providing support, my parents-in-laws exhibited a lack of understanding. They subtly discouraged me from visiting my ailing father and implied that allocating funds to them would be more appropriate. Fortunately, Billy intervened and put an end to their inappropriate conversation. Nonetheless, this incident fueled my determination to teach them a lesson when I was in a more stable state of mind. Unfortunately, my father passed away around 4 months after his diagnosis, leaving me devastated. Witnessing his declining health was agonizing, and though I recognized the inevitability, the loss was difficult to accept. Billy became my pillar of strength throughout this ordeal, accompanying me to my father's town to arrange the funeral. During this challenging time, my mother-in-law and father-in-law bombarded me with questions about my inheritance. They also inquired about the funeral expenses, displaying a complete lack of empathy. Despite our disgust, Billy and I chose not to confront them, agreeing that they would face consequences upon our return home. As expected, Leroy and Cheyenne wasted no time and confronted us immediately upon our return. Their intrusive questions about the inheritance and assumptions about the house were met with my disbelief and Billy's frustration. I couldn't fathom their insensitivity, especially after returning from my father's funeral. Vanessa, please refrain from acting so petulantly. Since Billy married you, there's been a lingering question among us. Why did he do it? Your job isn't noteworthy, and your appearance isn't particularly striking. Me and Leroy can't help but speculate. Perhaps it's all about the money, Cheyenne remarked coldly. Mom, what's gotten into you? How can you insult me and my wife like that? We married out of love, as I've repeatedly emphasized. At least have the decency not to bring this up today, Billy snapped, clearly appalled by his mother's words. Billy, there's no need for such drama. We're simply posing a question to your wife. She can answer, and we can satisfy our curiosity. We wouldn't mind if you married Vanessa for financial reasons. In fact, it would be delightful to know you secured such a grand prize, Leroy chimed in smugly. Accusing your son of being a gold digger? You two are truly dreadful parents. You're both out of your minds. I marvel at how a remarkable man like Billy could be born to such repulsive individuals, I retorted, barely containing my anger. Enough with the small talk, Vanessa. Tell us about your inheritance. This is the day I've been anticipating. Billy mentioned his father lived in a substantial house, and now you can reveal it. Buy us a house. We'll make good use of the money. After all, we're your parents now, Cheyenne demanded, her voice dripping with greed. Hearing this made my blood boil. I was seething with rage as Billy stared at his parents in disbelief. Even he couldn't fathom their greed and selfishness. It had been less than a month since my father passed away, and they were already planning to spend my inheritance on themselves. They even had the audacity to declare themselves my new parents. At that moment, I knew I had to take action. For years I had tolerated them for Billy's sake. Now, I wanted to reveal to my husband just how objectionable his parents truly were. Actually, my dad didn't have the house in his name when he passed away. I'm sorry to inform you, but he owned that house for a considerable time before he had to let it go for certain reasons, I explained calmly. watching their expressions. So, let me understand this correctly. You assert that your father no longer possessed ownership of his house? Leroy asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Contrary to that, as I previously mentioned, he did indeed own the house a substantial time ago. However, he recently had to part ways with it. Therefore, I did not inherit the house or any form of inheritance, as some might assume, I clarified, standing my ground. Oh dear, so your father was financially strained after all? I always suspected you lacked affluence. Your father couldn't even retain ownership of his house until the end. He passed away without a property under his name. You, as a wife, are only good for nothing. Cheyenne sneered, her words biting. Our marriage isn't going to fall apart just because she didn't inherit anything. You can't end our relationship over such a trivial reason, Billy said firmly, stepping in to defend me. Billy, don't interrupt, Leroy added angrily. We won't allow you to continue this marriage. You've disappointed us by marrying into a less fortunate family. You never considered how you could keep your parents content. I'm ashamed to have a son like you, he concluded, his voice filled with disdain. He then turned to me. Vanessa, I'm certain you've ensnared my son into marrying you. People like you employ underhanded tactics to attract men. Your ultimate plan was to cut us off and enjoy my son's wealth alone. Well, Vanessa, I won't allow that to happen. Leroy and Cheyenne incessantly pressured Billy to divorce me and leave. They insisted that he marry a wealthy girl so that my in-laws could relish the luxurious life they always desired. Billy, infuriated, started breaking down. I recognized the urgency to help him make a decision. I confronted Billy, inquiring if he was willing to permit his parents to manipulate our lives in such a manner. I had silently endured their money-centric behavior, refraining from voicing my concerns because he harbored guilt about severing financial ties with them. I probed whether he intended to persist in including them in our lives. Billy conveyed his frustration, affirming that he had reached his limit. He recognized his parents' true nature and how they had exploited him over the years to fulfill their aspirations. He concluded that he could no longer tolerate their behavior. Despite Billy's resistance, his parents persisted in asserting that divorcing me was in his best interest. They contended that they hadn't invested in him for him to extend charity to someone else. They pressured him to embark on a fresh start, urging him to seek a wealthy wife, and assured him of their support in this endeavor. They emphasized that he had already made too many mistakes on his own. I will not abandon my wife simply because she did not receive an inheritance, my husband declared firmly. I refuse to be manipulated any longer. I've decided to stay with Vanessa. Both of you are no longer welcome in my life, he added firmly. Billy's father responded sharply. Why are you holding on to Vanessa? This is not what we had envisioned. She is entirely unsuitable for you. If you choose to remain in this marriage, we want nothing to do with you. We won't support you when she potentially robs you and leaves you in financial ruin. Your behavior towards your mother and me is simply terrible. I decided to disclose the truth to them, anticipating that revealing my true net worth would make them beg and plead, so I went all out. I assured them that I didn't need to exploit Billy or take his money, as I had more than enough resources on my own to take care of him without their assistance. You, Vanessa, don't need to lie to make yourselves appear better. We know the truth, that you come from a modest background, and your job doesn't generate substantial income. Soon, you'll likely target Billy's wealth once you're in dire straits, my mother-in-law concluded. Contrary to your assumptions, I am not a pauper's daughter. I have $80 million in my bank account, not earned through my job, but inherited from my father, I retorted. Don't attempt to deceive us. Your father had nothing in his name, as you stated. Your lies won't work on us. We'll ensure you divorce our son and leave him alone, my father-in-law added. Billy, sensing the tension, interrupted his parents' disbelief. Despite your anger, I'll tell you what's true. My wife has her own wealth. We don't need your judgments, Leroy scoffed. Where did this sudden influx of money come from? You previously claimed you didn't receive an inheritance, even stating that your father didn't own his house until the end. How is this possible? He asked. What you didn't know was that my father owned a significant ranch where he resided. He sold both the ranch and the house before his passing, providing me with an early inheritance before entering hospice. He didn't want me to use my own money for his care, unlike your perspective, I explained. My parents-in-laws were stunned. Seeking confirmation from Billy, they fell silent for a moment, exchanged glances, and then dramatically changed their stance. Suddenly, they expressed joy, relieved that my father had left me well off. Billy's father softened his tone. We misjudged the situation. Now, considering the financial aspect settled, there's no reason for you to leave Billy, he uttered, and Cheyenne added, We regret our initial skepticism, Vanessa. We really do. We were just trying to look out for Billy. Having considered their mission accomplished, my in-laws stopped expressing their dissatisfaction and backtracked. Billy, however, wasn't ready to forgive. Your audacity to demand financial support is beyond words, Billy lashed out. You earlier insisted on our divorce, and now you're backtracking, trying to act like family, he asked angrily. His parents, backtracking further, apologized for their assumptions. We only thought that because you concealed the truth, Cheyenne said softly. Despite their apology, I remained resolute. I categorically refuse any form of reconciliation, I stated. You disrupted my mourning for my father, and the wounds caused by your actions are too deep to either forgive or forget. Enough time has passed, and given your disdainful attitude towards me, there is no reason to keep you both in our lives. Billy supported my decision. Today I am prioritizing the protection of myself and my wife from your toxic influence, he declared. Leave my house immediately. Any thought of returning after this month is out of the question. Financial support from me will also end, my husband added. Leroy and Cheyenne reacted with desperation. Please don't sever ties, they implored. But Billy, unmoved by their pleas, went so far as to threaten to involve the police if they did not leave the premises immediately. They left, but bombarded Billy and me with calls and messages. I, emotionally drained, blocked their numbers, while Billy issued warnings of legal consequences if their harassment persisted. In the ensuing days, Billy took charge of dealing with his estranged family, allowing me the space to properly mourn my father. Reflecting on my memories, I realized the profound kindness of my father. He sold his property to spare me the burden, I said. He used the proceeds to cover hospice expenses. He was a testament to selflessness. Billy, while liberated from his toxic family, still grappled with grief. People think I abandoned them, he said, but when they know the full story, they'll understand. I had to do what was best for us. Despite our efforts to sever contact, my in-laws continued their pursuit. Billy and me considered obtaining restraining orders. Amidst the chaos, I found a silver lining. I recently discovered that I'm pregnant. Despite the sadness of my father not being a part of our child's life, we'll find joy in preparing for our little one.